Fall and fire pits. They just seem to go together, don't they? Chill air, warm fire, hot cider, maybe roasting some marshmallows and hot dogs, good conversation with family and friends. We have a unique townhome community in which we live. It's a circle of townhomes built around a central green space. We have a fire pit in our green space. And in the fall, it's just customary that one evening, during the evenings, families will come out and build a fire in the fire pit. And as soon as neighbors see the fire pit going, it's a welcome. Come and join. Neighbors come out. It's a BYOB, bring your own beverage. And we will stand around and sit around and talk together well into the evening. It's a great community to live in because of that. You're asking, I guess, why would I bring you to a fire pit in our journey in prayer? I brought you to a fire pit because I'm thinking about something that Martin Luther liked to say. He said it in different ways, but basically what Martin Luther said was, it's very important when we read God's Word and we look at its truths that we learn how to warm our hearts over the truths of God's Word. We learn how to warm our hearts over the truths of God's Word. It's a step that we usually skip, however. Normally we'll sit down and we'll read the Bible. We'll note some truths that we see there that may be of interest to us, and then we'll go directly into prayer. Usually when we go directly into prayer, we go to our prayer list, which deals with my personal needs, family needs, maybe the needs of friends. But those are pretty small prayers in many ways, and we feel the smallness of them too, I think. What Martin Luther was saying is that when we read God's Word, there's a step that we tend to skip, that we miss. And that is taking those truths and slowing down and meditating on them. Letting them sort of percolate in our minds, letting them churn in our hearts, rolling them over. In our journey journal, what we are trying to do is to help you apply that middle step that we tend to skip, warming our hearts over God's Word. And the way we're trying to help you apply it is through the 5 targets of the Lord's Prayer. You remember those 5 targets. There's God's honor. Our Father in heaven, hallowed, honored be your name. God's kingdom, your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God's forgiveness, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And God's protection, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And what we're doing in our journey journal is we're slowing down in our reading to ponder the truths that we've read in light of those 5 targets of the Lord's Prayer. In those 5 targets, we're learning to warm our hearts. To reflect on God's honor, we're learning to warm our hearts, to reflect on God's kingdom. We read a passage and we ponder, what does this teach me about the rule of God through His Son, Jesus Christ now? And how does it lead me to pray for God's kingdom to come, for Christ's truth and love to rule more and more in a world that is so dark and troubled and struggling with evil and hardship and pain and sorrow? As we read God's Word, we stop and we ponder not only God's honor, God's kingdom, but God's provision. It slows us down to consider, what does this passage teach me about how very dependent I am upon God's promises and His provision and His help and His love all day long, and how needy are all my friends for that very thing, and how generous is God and faithful is God in providing for me through His Son, Jesus Christ. We want to slow down and warm our hearts as we ponder not only God's honor and God's kingdom and God's provision, but God's forgiveness. Because as we ponder the truths we've read, we warm our hearts considering that there's a lot of ways in which my heart just isn't motivated by God's honor. I tend to live my life in many ways wanting to rule it my way and not submit to Christ's rule. I tend to live in a very self-reliant way and not dependent way. And it leads me to confess and to delight in the work of Christ on my behalf. We slow down and we meditate on what we've read in light of God's honor, God's kingdom, God's provision, God's forgiveness, and God's protection, because we ask ourselves as we read, how do we need God's protection in the face of the evil that we know is within us, the evil that is around us? How do we need to pray for God's protection, not only for us and for our family and friends, but for the saints around the world who are suffering terribly by the evil one and by persecution? So I want to encourage you to keep working at your journey journal, because what you're doing in doing that, you're adding that step that we often skip, that step of warming your heart over God's word, of pondering, of meditating. And as you do that, what it does is it enlarges and it expands your prayer life. It expands your prayer life in worship of God's honor. It expands your prayer life as you pray for God's kingdom come. It expands your prayer life as you seek God's provision and protection. So keep at the journey journal. Keep asking God to help you. Warm your heart over His word as you read it, to meditate, and then to let that lead you into and enlarge your life of prayer. And one more thing. This is just a little practical thing. There's an app. If you have a smartphone, there's an app that you can download. Real simple. It's called Ask Pastor John by John Piper. This week that we're recording, it'll be the previous week when you watch it. There is a series of 5 podcasts from Dr. Tim Keller about his new book on prayer. They're about 10 or 12-minute podcasts, Monday through Friday of this week, that I think you'll find very encouraging as you personally and as a small group continue your journey in prayer and continue pondering what it means to warm your hearts over God's word, and in so doing to enlarge and enhance your life of prayer personally and together. God's blessing on your small group, your journey group, and we will see you on Sunday. And may all of your fall fire pits remind you about warming your hearts, that middle step as you read God's word, as you meditate on God's word, and as you pray God's word. Thank you.